I'll get some physical pen and paper so that I can take some notes at the very least. Yeah, because I don't really have much paper in front of me aside from this thing from the city of Huntington Beach to pay a parking ticket. Come on, man. My van's not running, man. You can't give me tickets, man. Come on. Fucking fascists, man. These fascists working for the city of Huntington Beach just keep giving me tickets. Yeah, the book thing is what I was thinking of. I think Jangles did a good job rejecting the book early. Yeah, I think he wanted to for sure, and I think it's good that he did that. But we'll see how that plays out. So, do you think Jangles' analogy for white fragility would go over people's? We'll get into that. Let's start with this first thing. So the framing, the mechanics of Jangles using this separation very early. It can go one of two ways. People can like it or people cannot like it. The people that like you are typically going to look past that. The people that don't like you or are listening at the intellectual level, they're going to be wary of that, though, right? The same way that there were people that were wary of Doghouse not wanting to talk about abortion because they twisted that into a million reasons why he wouldn't want to talk about that. People are going to do the same for this term. Imagine that you're on the other side. You disagree with the term white fragility. You've looked into the book. You think it's dumb as fuck. And in your mind, you're connecting the term directly to the book, 100%, because that's where the term came from. You've got a lot of uphill battle to do before I think you can adequately separate yourself from the text and still talk about the term. That is an uphill argument that has to be a part of this discussion. I fully expected that the way that this was going to play out was they were going to have to, or Jangles in particular, because he's on the yes side, has to divorce himself from the book. That's hard. That term comes from that book. The people on the conservative side find the book to be an easy path of argument too. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to divorce yourself? He did that in his opening. Now, for the people that agree with him again, they're going to overlook that. So that's fine. For the people that, are on your team, that's going to work out well. For the people that are not on your team, that was not a very good decision at all, right? Because a lot of their problem is about how this term relates to the book, and they marry the term in the book. So if you try to talk about the term without talking about the book, it almost feels like you're not willing to come and debate the topic at hand, which is about this word from the book. And like it goes so deep that a lot of the outcry of support for him is for people that I don't think were paying attention to that level of the debate. But this is something I saw a lot watching Destiny and Hassan stuff too, is that the way that people are responding obviously is not going to be from this level. It's a lot of like, I don't like this other person or I like this person, and therefore my comments are going to reflect that, because a lot of the things that they said didn't match up with reality. So in some of the comments that tried to be witty about their support of Jangles, they said things like, even the moderator knew XYZ, when I feel like the moderator, and I don't actually feel like, I know 100% for sure that the moderator had to intervene more to stop Jangles than he did Milo, by at least 3 or 4 times the amount. So again, if we step back from watching this in support of Jangles and we watch this as somebody who's either neutral or on the side of Milo, this didn't go well for Jangles. Jangles doesn't properly argue the separation between the term and the book in his opening statement. His opening statement was beautifully worded if we were in a courtroom, but the problem is it was very, very complicated. It had a lot of loaded diction, which means we have big, big words, and I think a lot of this is coming from the fact that the way it was written was meant to be read. It wasn't meant to be spoken. It wasn't meant to be heard. So it probably looks beautiful on the page. It probably hits all the points. If we put a checklist next to it, we could probably get all the parts of his thesis statement, and his supporting evidence, right? We could probably get all that. The problem is the way that it has been presented is such that it's going to be difficult to get all those points from it. It's very difficult to distill his opening statement down. It was quite a word salad, and unfortunately it was a word salad that didn't benefit from any repetition on the point at hand. a lot of it was trying to introduce these new terms that he had hoped he would adequately tie to white fragility so that we can kind of swap out the definitions there. But that is half of the battle. Half of the battle is going to be taking this term and substituting the definition. And if you want to substitute it with these, very basic psychological terms, that's great. But you can't assume that as a granted. I felt like he assumed that, he took that for granted the entire conversation. There was a lot of condescension about these are basic hogwash or whatever political terms. And it's like, well, you can say that. And that works for the people that are listening that support you already and that know these things already. But for the people who are on the fence, skeptical of academia, maybe skeptical of your position, none of that works. None of that works for them. It almost seems like you're full of yourself, you're haughty, and you just think that, everybody should understand your perspective, or your perspective is the default correct one, which doesn't come off well, again, to the people that oppose you. So a lot of the criticisms that we're going to have for Jangles in this conversation pertain to the people that disagree with him and the people in the middle. It's not going to be so much the people that support him. They seem to have enjoyed that. So that's great. That means we don't have to worry about that audience segment anymore. We can go ahead and set them aside. So the people that agree with him, he's doing great for. That was good. It was good for them to see somebody be mean to Milo. Would also work well for his own camp is Milo kind of flopped over. Like he kind of just let him do whatever. That was weird for me because my little understanding of Milo is that he's like a fiery debater, that he's like rough to deal with and he's snarky and whatever, and all these things that Django was kind of echoing in his own performance. So it was weird to see Milo just immediately kind of do that. Now, what that was attributed to from Jangles supporters was he knew from the get-go that his arguments weren't going to work and that this dude was going to take an entirely new approach. And it's like, yeah, that's one way you could look at it for sure. That he realized that he had lost this argument from the get-go and whatever. That's one way. Doesn't that sound a little bit biased? I don't think that's how it happened at all. I think maybe a more realistic way of phrasing that would have been that the moment Milo realized that they weren't going to be able to talk about the book, he got really frustrated and determined that he was going to go down this path of like looking like a wuss. But that's as far as I would take that kind of like interpretation of what happened, right? Because it's undeniable that he was upset that Jangles immediately said, we're not going to talk about the book. I'm not here to defend the book.
Yeah, why would I want to defend a book I didn't write?
You seem, well, that's what you're here to do. Because you agreed to defend the, you agreed to defend the premise of the book, you silly.
Because I presume that a lot of that prepped material that Milo had was probably for the book. And we see parts of it later when just like haphazardly he starts throwing them into the conversation after it was clear that we're not going to be going the direction that he assumed they were. And at that moment, he could have decided, I'm not here for the argument then. I'm just going to use a few social things that this other person does and just rail on them the entire time. So one of them was Jangles stopped him from interrupting something he was saying very early on.
Tell them, hold on. If you tell them that, say that, hold on, I'm not done. Whoa, come on. I'm not done making my point because I'm pretty sure that you didn't listen or understand the point.
And that triggered the fuck out of Milo. And from there on, Milo used this kind of like, don't interrupt me thing the entire time because Jangles had done that.
Like a school teacher rearranging her charged crayons.
I could be a terrible, no, I had intent there.
Is it okay to interrupt now? Your rules, not mine.
Sorry, buddy. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Your rules, not mine. I'm attempting to be polite. I'm attempting to engage with you. I threw out most of my opening because you haven't respected the debate question. Now you're not respecting your interlocutor by being patronizing and rude. And now you're breaking your own rules by interrupting me when you just scolded me for doing the same. It makes me wonder whether you're in faith. You just did it again.
Now, part of my advice, and this is mostly coming from hindsight, is to not do that, right? If we don't want that to be a rule throughout the conversation, or that's not like a tonal expectation we want to set, I wouldn't, like Destiny does really well to say, interrupt me if I ever say anything, whatever, and gets that out of the way from the very beginning, because for him, it's very important that he frames the conversation that way. For Destiny, over time, he's learned that one of his largest criticisms is fast talking.
Rule number 2, if I use a word that is too big for you, or you think that I'm trying to obfuscate, then tell me. Do not hide behind this idea that I use big words to make things sound confusing.
Or he throws out so many points and just gish gallops and I can't respond to any of them. Or he says one thing I disagreed with and it's in the sea of other points, so there's no way I could have responded to it. He just talks on and on forever. So to stop that, he puts that rule at the very beginning so that if at any point people have that criticism, he can go, well, I started out the entire conversation by telling you can interrupt me at any point that you disagree. And that's a standard I hold you to in the conversation as well. If you say something I disagree with, I'll probably jump in as well. And that way we can make sure that we're addressing anything and that we don't say a million points, And the other half of this is Destiny has learned that other people actually really do this, and it's actually a problem. Other people will say a million points so that the argument or the assumption, that the picture they paint is very clear, but it doesn't give you the opportunity to pick apart each one or to say why they don't relate to each other. So for him, it's good to establish that rule early, both for himself and for the person that he debates with. So, you want to be careful about those rules, and some of them are unspoken, like this whole "don't interrupt me, I'm finishing my point" or some shit like that. It's like, well, if you pull that 5 minutes into the conversation, you are setting an expectation moving forward. You did just throw an action into the ether that your opponent can do with whatever they please. Another thing we're going to be talking about Jangles about that's kind of along the same lines is being more careful about the questions that you give. Sorry, let me move this so I can see my beautiful face. So basically, the questions that you give, you should think about. The question that you give should set you up for further points in the argument. If Lux is still in the chat, this is something that I talk with Lux about. Is I don't think people think about this enough, but the questions that you ask and how you frame them do a lot for you. Questions in general kind of push the conversation forward, right? They set up how things are going to go. And so every time you ask a question, it's almost like you're using a turn to reframe the whole conversation. So what you do with that question, how you set that up, should be very intentional. My idea is that you look at the position that you want to have immediately following this question, immediately following the answer, and make an educated decision as to what you're going to ask. So instead of asking somebody a more broad, good faith question, I might want to ask them something where we're kind of framing it in a certain way. Or if there's honestly something I'm trying to discover with this question, let me word this in a way that's going to produce a result that benefits my argument. If I'm honestly trying to find out what the other person is thinking on it, let me find out a clever way that'll bring us to a space that neither of us had prepped for, right? So if I want to get the idea of what somebody actually thinks about something, what I tend to like to do is ask a question that I don't think they've ever heard before, or to take the framing in a place where neither of us are going to be comfortable. Because what I'm interested in is seeing organically how they form their ideas and why they have this opinion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us both and we'll go this way and transplant us somewhere else where we can talk more about these things without them knowing what's going on, without any prepped arguments or planned debate tactics or anything. That's if I honestly want to know about their position. But yeah, so like making decisions as to like, what is this response going to look like? Is it about something they've never heard of before? Or is this a question that they likely prep for, right? And in this conversation in particular, I suspect that Jangles assumed Milo was bad faith. I'm not going to say that that's bad. Okay, I'm not going to say that from the get-go that that's bad. What I will say is if you assume that he was bad faith from the get-go, your rhetorical decisions should reflect that. If I'm going to ask him a question, I'm not going to phrase it in a good faith way. Because the problem with phrasing good faith questions is that Milo has prepped for good faith questions. Those are his opportunities to spout whatever he wants. And if you look at his track record of how his conversations go, you could predict that if I give him an open-ended question, if I give him a question that he may have prepped for, if I give him a question on a particular mechanic of this argument or of this debate, he is going to be prepped for that. I have to assume that. And if he's not prepped for it, he's very, very good at working in his other points, his other talking points, into his explanations. One thing that we see a lot with the Nazi people, not to compare Milo to the Nazis, whatever, although some of you would like that, in conversations with Nazis, they do this quite a bit. They don't really care what question you're asking. What they're looking for are opportunities to speak unabated. And Milo secured himself a lot of opportunities to speak unabated because from the very beginning, he utilized the rule that Jangles made up about not interrupting him. So that's kind of how this whole thing starts to fall apart, is Jangles immediately plays into the moderator and plays into these rules that Jangles has set up and kind of steers the conversation in a way that'll let him do what he wants. So what do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is if I wait until you ask me a good faith question and I start giving a response and we have the expectation that you cannot interrupt me, here's what's going to happen. I can answer that question in any meandering way that I want because A, the host is going to jump in and stop you if you start to talk over me.
Justin, when you do ask him a question, though, like he's probably going to respond. So to be fair, I do want to give Milo a chance.
I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. No,
hold on.
I'm literally trying to get you back to talking about the topic.
My feelings, I don't know.
Let's hear Milo for a second.
Subject. I've asked you like 3 times now.
Let's give Milo some time to...
If you
conversations don't have questions in them.
Just one sec. Okay, so let's give Milo like maybe 2 to 3 minutes uninterrupted in the same way, and then we'll come right back.
You don't want to.
Now I just gave you uninterrupted time.
One sec.
I just gave you a racist
when you 1 second. You think Milo was trying to speak, and then Milo was describing your intrusion on that, and so I do want to. If we go back to the original question,
B, I can appeal to this other rule that you've made up to try and get you to stop talking over me, and that means that C, I can take any way that I want to answer this question. I can go any meandering path that I want because I know that I'm protected in making my statement. I know that I've got at least 1 to 2 minutes before you're going to be able to interrupt me and the mod not say anything. If I'm a minute or 2 into my conversation or my response, it doesn't matter how meandering it is. If you start interrupting me, that mod is going to jump in here and stop it. And if I know that, if I'm confident in that moving forward, if I've established that by constantly highlighting this one thing that you did at the very beginning and you never push back on that, then I've created that expectation, I've created that safe space, and I will say what I want to say. And we saw that in the few opportunities that Milo took to kind of go off on his tangent, there's a lot of stuff about black culture and fatherless homes, and the Democrats have been manipulating black voters into shooting themselves in the foot. And like, he got his key points, his key talking points that he wanted in, regardless of how the conversation went, because all he needs is a question and some protected airtime to say whatever. And yeah, so he played it really well if his point was to say his talking points. And the other thing that I'm kind of getting worried about is and sorry we keep talking about Milo here, but Milo is changing some of his rhetoric around some of these points to better appeal to a left audience, I think. I think there's a lot of little things that he places in here, little hints of what he supports or solutions to particular problems that are meant to appeal to somebody on the left who feels like they're not liking how things are going. Man, let me find something here. The first thing is seeding all the history stuff. That was kind of interesting from Milo. I mean, it's good. That's not, like, if I were advising Milo, that's not a fight that I would have if I were Milo. The history fight and the culture fight, that's stupid as fuck. Like, you're going to lose that because literally the facts are not on your side. So arguing that, like, historically there hasn't been racism or, like, things that disenfranchise African Americans would be silly. And so he doesn't argue against that. And more than that, because he's making that, I would say, like, kind of concession as far as where we expect him to be, because he's making that, he can also other himself from a lot of his fellow right-leaning people. And he does that throughout this conversation. I think I can clearly see that he's trying to paint a new image for himself. I don't know how well that's going to go for him, like given the taste everybody has in their mouth, but that's what he's trying to do. It's just worrisome to see that that he's getting these opportunities and that I'm starting to see like a change in how he's approaching things. So it was scary for me. And it makes me even scarier that like a lot of the responses to this conversation were along the lines of like, yeah, you were mean, but like he deserves you to be mean to him. He's an asshole too. And like, fuck it, whatever you got to do for Milo. And it's like, you guys, this is the same problem that we had when you were making all these like homophobic things about Pete Buttigieg and stuff like that. Like those are behaviors you have to cut just as well as the other ones. Like, you know, I don't think it's smart to generally call for bad faith arguing, even if it's against somebody you disagree with, because I just don't know. I don't know. And this isn't like a good flavor of bad faith either, because Jangles doesn't really explain his point very well. The closest that he gets to it is a response near the end of their talk, which ended earlier than I thought it would, because Milo kind of throws his weight around the whole conversation and is able to end it and throw it to viewer questions. I don't know if he's prepped for viewer questions, but it seemed like from the little more that I continued to watch, he got a lot of people asking questions to help him, although I don't know. I didn't watch the whole Q&A part of it. I stopped. Yeah, there's some things that Jangles is saying too that are completely anti-conservative. So I wonder what the point of the conversation was. Because he didn't make Milo look like an idiot to anybody who didn't already think that. He didn't really establish the argument he was trying to make about white fragility. He didn't really push the idea of moving past that term or like wording it in a way that is going to be more palatable to conservatives. He points to problems but offers no solutions to them. I don't know. I didn't come out super pro Jangles. I think there's a lot of things Jangles could work on, which is why the response was even more crazy to me. I even watched one of the talks that he had with another YouTuber afterwards where they're kind of going through how the talk went.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Brenton Lengel.
And again, it was like, I don't know if we watched the same conversation or if you took notes or anything, but some of the things that you're saying are just not true. Yeah. I don't know. I think the major divide here was separating himself from the book. I know that was going to be helpful to him and it's something he needed to do. I just don't know if seeing that didn't work out in the opening statement, he should have probably worked harder on explaining that. Like the second you hit resistance on trying to make a claim in your opening statement, I thought that that's where debates go. I thought that normally if you had a disagreement in your opening statements, that's where you go to continue the conversation. But like, it doesn't quite work out that way. And that's both of their faults here. Obviously, Milo takes us off track as well, especially towards the end. But I don't think we convinced many people with this that weren't already on our team. But yeah, that's kind of my summary of that. I don't know how many of you guys watched that. Like, does anybody have any comments? I don't know. Am I crazy? Am I off here? Am I off my freaking rocker with this? Am I all messed up? Because I'm super concerned about bringing a bunch of criticisms to somebody who received so many positive remarks about the debate. But I really think a lot of those have to do with, like, if you pick a fight with the devil, it doesn't matter if he kicks your ass. Like, you're still going to get a lot of praise for picking a fight with the devil. I agree, huh? I like Jangles, but it came off strange. Yeah, strange is a good way of putting it. Because I really think that the snark and stuff was just off-putting to some people. Like, for the people that were willing to criticize Jangles, it seemed to be words like unsportsmanlike and stuff like that. Or both of them being jerks or insufferable or whatever. You know, I think if Milo would have brought that same energy, this would have turned out very differently. But it's just the fact that Milo didn't come acting like a jerk. There wasn't much to play off of. When he's like, you know, cowering on the ground and whining at every single little hit, like, I don't know if you get anything from like half-ass punches while he's on the ground. I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, we get to, like, I'm interested to see how he interprets stuff, where he wants help with, whatever. I think we'll be okay showing the notes. So I'm just going to, he's not normally like that, but I think his reasoning is Milo is typically extremely bad faith. Yeah. And that's what I'm suspecting too, is he expected a bad faith conversation, which is why I think the direction that we'll go in is, you know, if you're prepping for a bad faith conversation, your actions step by step should all be based on that, right? Don't give him a good faith question if you assume that he's bad faith. Let me try to find where I have that bit about the question here. Question. I also got to prop up my laptop because it's really getting hot. One sec. Like it's really hot in this garage. I don't know how hot it is where y'all are living, but it's been hot today over here in California. Let's see here. Good old Southern California. Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and throw it over to my research view, and we'll look at both these at the same time. Please, for the love of God, go to the right screen. Okay. Because the other one had a bunch of doxing information on it. Oh, can you guys see me? No? Oh, weird. Let's, I'm going to grab my camera from here because I made a new one. I figured out how to get it to be 1080 and, like, be wider. I really feel like it needs more on this side, though. This side. Here, let's... Ah, that's good. All right. 100 F plus all week. Yeah, too much for me, man. I don't know what it is here, but it's humid. It's hot. Yeah, we ain't even got a breeze. Although I am in the garage, so maybe that affects it. Okay, where are my notes? Copy this. Copy. Go over to my research. Go to my camera and delete this old thing. Delete. We are going to delete you, yeah. Yeah, we are going to delete you all over the place. You better worry. You better be worried. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Remove. Yeah. Yes. Control V. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's get me in that corner. Wait, why am I not stretching consistently? Oh, no. I'm warping. I remember in Pixie Chat, we discussed how to react to a conversation partner turning out to be a bad faith in a good faith approach. Yeah, but I don't think Jangles wants to be good faith here. So that is a good point, though. In the Pixie Chat, we did talk about some ways that you can deal with this, but a lot of that comes from the fact that Pixie is on an agreement approach, right? Pixie, everything that she is doing is constructive. So it's much easier to be like, well, you literally can't lash back out at them because you gain nothing from it. Your approach is constructive. So we can immediately put aside like all of the making fun of the other person options. And that makes it a lot easier because that limits our decisions. Because if we can't lash back out at them, if we can't reflect that behavior, then we have to do more productive things. But if you assume that the other conversational partner is bad faith and you want to be bad faith, which it seems like Jangles wanted to do in this conversation, then it's different. Then you want to get brownie points for making fun of them and stuff. So like that's why it would be different. I don't know if giving him a good faith approach to the bad faith person makes a lot of sense when he himself seems to be leaning into being bad faith here. Do you have any new comments on that? Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of them revolve around like wit, though. I haven't found any like structural ways of handling it because bad faith comes in so many different flavors and the conversations are all going to be different. So if you want to handle a bad faith actor, I think you have to hit them over the heads with like pieces of your argument from the conversation. And you almost have to have a conversation in parallel that you know the viewers are going to pay attention to, separate from what the person in front of you is paying attention to. And there's humor that you can derive from doing that. I remember you having to think on it at that time. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard to come up with, because it's like, well, if you're good faith and you want to continue building stuff, it's almost like you have to play a different game than what everybody else is playing. You have to like start to foster an audience that is going to listen at one level, and then realize your conversational partner is probably going to be listening at another, and to play a game that involves both of those to make you look really witty. So I can say things that I know to the people who are paying attention at a surface level for the conversation, they're going to get a positive response out of it, while at the same time having that thing that I say, be difficult for the other person to deal with. So it's about making decisions that do both of those things. So saying something, for instance, that attacks the pride of somebody who's bad faith tends to work really well, especially if that attack on their pride is something that will generally be supported by the audience. So if the audience is listening, for example, at a logical level to an argument, making fun of a person by solely pointing out the logical flaw in their argument and showing the absurdity of that connection rather than the absurdity of the person requires them to respond as if you were talking about the person, because ideologues tend to be real connected to their arguments. So if you can make fun of their argument, objectively speaking, they will jump in and defend it as if you were making fun of them. To an audience that is paying attention to all of the arguments, they see what you were trying to do with the argument, whether they agreed or disagreed, that has its impact. But then they also see him or her responding emotionally to this factual attack, right? To this argument that is happening at the logical level, they're responding very emotionally as if their personhood was invested in it. And so that works for ideologues, but again, depends on the flavor of crazy that you have on the other side. If the other side just wants opportunities to spout their nonsense, then we're going to want to cut off their opportunities to spout their nonsense, or counter every single time they spout their nonsense with some kind of note to the audience about that, and how that looks is going to be very different. Some people like Destiny like making fun of and pointing out flaws in a giant diatribe that somebody said. So it's going to depend on the flavor of bad faith that you're dealing with. So that's what makes that difficult. You have to build it around the ideologue that's in front of you, basically. Pick things that are going to be upsetting to them, that is going to knock them off of their game, and things that an audience who's listening objectively will pick up on. And when we talk to Jangles about this Milo debate, you'll find that a lack of attention to the people who are listening objectively costed Jangles here when it didn't need to. When if Jangles would have been aware and cognizant of the people who are listening objectively, he could have played to those strengths while also being snarky and whatever. It's just making sure that you hold on to the people who are looking at things consistently and objectively. But that's easier said than done. Orange is going to be him. Blue is going to be Milo. I do that in the very beginning so that I can get a sense of the pattern. Let's kind of go through it. So he opens up criticizing the book and the term and the book's creator. Automatically on a bad foot. Automatically, this is going to be difficult. We have taken the crux of the argument and crammed it as if it was decided into our opening statement. Now, in all fairness to Jangles, he didn't know that that's what's happening here. This is a hindsight thing. I know that this argument is going to be primarily based around this first step that he's cooked into his opening already, which is redefining this term and divorcing it from the book. These are two things that are very difficult. There should have been an argument around these things. I expected that that's probably what this debate was going to be about, because a lot of the debates that I looked back on for this term tended to go that way, where we very quickly need to divorce it from the book. You can try to do that slyly in your opening statement.
Because the discourse around this book is garbage, and I didn't write it in the first place, this will be the last time I mention D'Angelo's book in my opening statement or in the debate as a whole.
But when it's packed into all this other density about your points...
However, we can also state a few facts. And after that, we inevitably have a few questions afterward. which led to the justification of federally sanctioned housing policies, including loans being intentionally denied to individuals redlined in Black neighborhoods, which led to Black people living in areas of concentrated poverty, which led to less access to upward mobility, which led to an increased motivation towards crime, which led to over-policing, which led to mass incarceration, which led to the loss of political power, which led to an inability to halt further losses of property values, which led to a decrease in the property taxes that inexplicably fund local school systems, which led to less funding for education in Black districts, which led to fewer opportunities to achieve better careers, which led to. If you didn't know about it, that's also your fault. Nothing was stopping you from doing the tiny amount of research it would have taken for you to find out. And ask yourself, does a good person buy things made with the blood of slave labor? The answer to that is no. So yeah, it is your fault. And yeah, you are a bad person.
And there's too much of it to sift through. It's executed poorly. Anything that's a to-do box, these are notes that I have that I want to give to him. This time around, I'm trying a new system with the notes where I try to check these off if I've already mentioned them to him. And then at the end of the talk, if he's like, do you have any other points? I'm going to go through all the boxes and just make sure we've checked them all. So I said, it's good that you said you won't mention the book again, because to me at the beginning of the conversation, and again, I only know because of hindsight that this didn't work out. For me at the beginning of the conversation, it's important to set that tonally, to tonally put out there in your protected opening statement that you disagree with the book. It's good to have that in there no matter what. You may have to continue arguing that point, which was clear immediately following with Milo's response. It was very clear we're going to have to argue those, but having it in the opening statement is good because it gives us the backstory and the tone and everything that we need to kind of interpret where you're coming from on the rest of your arguments. However, Milo likely planned to use the book, and the conversation would seem to be about the book's term. So I don't know how we move past it. Past me was correct. We don't move past it. The conservative dig kind of automatically draws the line. We don't have to. So he automatically has a dig to the conservatives in his opening statement about conservative opinions and conservatives in particular. These don't need to be in there. Again, if we're talking about the 40% that's against you, the 20% in the middle, and the 40% that is on your side, this framing that Destiny likes to do, if you're aiming for the 20 and the 40, you are risking them with little conservative digs that needn't be there, because we don't need to make fun of conservatives to make fun of conservative ideas. These things can happen separately. And to people on the left, it may seem like, oh, well, these two things have overlap that's like this. Like it's so close to each other that like it may as well be the same thing. Like who cares? Like if their points are dumb and we already know they're dumb and I'm saying that the points are dumb, what extra is it to say that the people that hold these opinions are also dumb? And it's like, well, it's a lot, rhetorically speaking. It's a big cost. Like the opportunity cost of that is huge. Like we can still retain the attention and respect of the conservative listener if we don't attack them in our opening statement. So this was a needless rhetorical loss from the beginning. Slavery is still happening. Could have been you. You helped it by participating. This is his argument here. I had to really simplify it because it's really dense. Now, the way it was worded, the way it probably read on paper was really good. However, I don't know if it worked quite as well with him saying it, or I don't think it worked quite as well him saying it to people who aren't already on his team. To the people who already hold this belief, they may easily be able to point out all of the individual parts of his argument and the general idea of what he's saying. But that's because they're on your team. So it's almost like I'm reading an abstract for a paper I already wrote, right? I already know what the whole paper's about. Like, I've been convinced of this. I have some kind of logic in my head that's led me to the conclusion. I have evidence to support it. So hearing word for word your argument in support of something I'm already in support of, yeah, it sounds brilliant. And the fact that it's worded really well, that's great. Now, it's not worded very well for the people who are not already on that side or who are not privy to these ideas. They don't connect as well. They're not as clear. And there's a lot in there. So if you don't understand one or two terms, you're going to be thrown off for the entire thing, right? And that's a problem because some of the people that don't understand something ascribe negative values to you quickly going through things that they don't understand. We see this with Destiny a lot. There's a lot of, you talk too fast, you're making too many points, you're just throwing shit at the wall and sees what sticks. There's a lot of negative associations people can make when this happens, that the reality is they didn't understand a term or two, but the way that plays out in their behavior is they think that you gish galloped or whatever. So you want to be careful about this. If we're going to make 1 billion points in our opening, we want to make sure that they're clear enough that the other side will understand them, that all the terms and things are things that they understand. And it looks especially bad if you didn't understand them, because he constantly reiterates that these are very simple, very well understood, commonly agreed upon psychological terms.
This stuff is bog standard psychology, not even remotely controversial in the field. The psychological theory is bog standard psychology, because the actual content of the book is just, it's essentially what it is. It's bog standard psychology. It's not questioned in the field, and it's not an impugning on anybody's moral character like people seem to think it is. It's basic stuff.
That's like, okay, that's great for the people that are on your team. But again, if this person doesn't understand it, they're going to think all these negative things. And the snarkiness really doesn't work on the person who doesn't understand these basic psychology terms and whatever, right? It's rough. It's tough. It's not very good.
Why you bullying me?
It doesn't work for the people that aren't already on your team. Where a lot of this falls through is in appealing to the 40% that are against him and the 20% in the middle. And that's from the very beginning onward through the entire conversation. I will say, and this is my note, I will say that none of this is directly related to the larger argument, though, at least not obviously at the beginning. Seems like a diatribe before you switch back to racism. Yeah, so connecting this larger argument that he is describing through a lot of these things that are going on in the world and history and psychology, he mixes that all together. But his argument, the actual sentence that summarizes his thesis, his point, he uses way less in comparison to all of the arguments. Whereas, like, if you stuck around for any of my essay advice, a lot of the number one thing we care about is the topic, right? In this case, the topic for this debate is that term. If I'm going to constantly be making points, I want to constantly tie them back to my topic so that every point that I make bolsters my argument. The problem is we have a lot of arguments all packed together, and then it's a very quick, in my opinion, too quick tie to then your broader argument. And this happens later in a question that he's asked that he doesn't respond very well to. Milo gives him a loaded question because, as I note here and is prevalent throughout the conversation, Milo is a lot more careful about questions, but this is a uncharacteristically open one. He asks that if these are psychological constants, so these principles that Jangles is saying makes up the term white fragility, that's Jangles' whole argument, is that if we just take these individual psychological principles and then we wrap them up in a group, you can call that group white fragility or whatever you want. And so Milo goes, okay, well, if white fragility is just made up of these individual psychological constants, then we could have something like Mexican fragility, right? And I want to see what that looks like. I want to know about Mexican fragility among other kinds of fragility. And that's a bit memey. Again, he framed this question in a way that will be beneficial to him regardless of how Jangles answers this, unless it's clever. But Jangles' answer to this wasn't very good. I didn't think your answer was good here, but couldn't put my finger on it. I just didn't understand it. And the reason why I had to go back and check the quote is because Jangles responds very strongly to Milo saying that you didn't answer the question. Jangles responds that, like, I very clearly answered that question.
I actually answered the question quite directly.
And he does this a lot. He says that a lot. And so I was like, for this one, I'll write it down word for word and see why I don't feel like you answered the question. And again, as a viewer who's looking for an answer to the question, not a viewer who is willing to make the extra step of like, well, what Milo is saying is a ridiculous framing and I'm not going to listen to the answer because it's a silly question. I'm not doing that jump. I'm trying to imagine this objective perspective. And in this objective perspective, you don't answer that question. So his answer is, and I quote, oh, well, that's actually a really interesting concept, because when I had told you earlier that people tend to justify the power systems they've been placed into, that applies to everybody, not just people on the top, but the people on the bottom as well. Milo interrupts a little bit, and then he says, those values trickle down into all aspects of society. If you believe that we're in a just system and you just happen to be at the bottom, you're more likely to try and justify the system, regardless of how actually just and equitable it is. He cuts him off again. Milo cuts him off. And then he finally gets out the last sentence, which is the actual answer to the whole question, while Milo is talking over him. His answer is actually, so that's what it would look like. The same principle in the same society applying to everyone, not just white people, but also all people of color. This still doesn't really answer what this will look like with Mexican fragility. It didn't give an answer that is going to be sufficient to somebody who is actually looking for an answer to this question. There are much more clever ways that we could have answered by going on this diatribe. The diatribe thing does not work this whole entire conversation. I'm surprised he never picked up on that. But I think it's because, again, he's demonized Milo going into this. He's assumed he's going to be bad faith, and he's going to reflect that in his actions. But it comes off so, like, not consistent that it comes off as, like, not being genuine or not being nice or sportsmanlike or whatever, because Milo actually has points where he's trying to be honestly, like, or I say honestly, that's assuming his intentions, but he comes off as honestly critical of some of the things that's going on, or asking questions that are fairly fair, right? That happens at a few points in here. Milo is respectful from the get-go, talking about how, like, thanks for talking to me. I know it's not easy, and I know that there's a lot of, like, nonsense that's involved with that.
First of all, want to pay tribute to the fact that you're here at all, because it can be very difficult these days for me especially, to speak to anybody. They tend to get browbeaten by their own fans, which is a very depressing and ghastly thing to submit yourself to. But I would just like to thank you, Justin, for showing up at all. And you gave us in your opening a very well structured, well organized, passionate, and in some ways quite persuasive opening, but it was to an entirely different question.
But Jangles is mean to him from the very beginning. And so, like, I really think if you came into this objectively, you're going to come away with a very different conclusion, because it didn't really go super well. If you were kind of like on the fence about both of these people, you don't come away liking either of them. Milo appears very whiny. Milo appears that at some point, maybe 40 minutes into the conversation, it's very clear he's not going to argue about this topic anymore. He's very upset with Jangles. Now, if he was able to convince you that Jangles is being bad this entire conversation, or bad faith, or interrupting, or any of these other seeds that he's trying to plant in the audience, if you agree at any point in that, you may just side with Milo and just say, well, you know, the Jangles guy was being a dick. I'm sure the Milo guy's bad, but, like, this Jangles guy's a dick. The way that you really make Milo look bad is you have to reference things that he's done in the past outside debates, which is what Jangles did in his highlights video about the debate, which is why I couldn't use his highlights video in the comments to judge how the debate went. Because those people got a bunch of 2015, 2016, 2014, whatever clips of Milo interlaced between clips of the debate, which were out of order and were obviously not favorable to Milo. But anyways, it's just like, you know, it's tough. This wasn't a very good anti-Milo thing. But whatever. I'll go ahead and get down to chat. I feel like Jangles tried to adopt the aesthetics of 2016 Milo. Yeah. I'd say there was some, like, reflecting of that. That's why I was like, Milo flopping over and constantly appealing to these rules and whatever. It comes off very strange to me, having known his other performances. But as an objective watcher, let's finish up going through his opening. You end on this note of moving past blaming Democrats or Republicans. If you're willing to go there, I wouldn't have included the conservative digs. So this is another thing, is like, and I think this is coming from people not looking from a purely rhetorical lens, but if we're willing to appeal to this idea of nonpartisan whatever, of, like, bringing together everybody, right? Like we talked about this week in the lesson about Obama. So if you're willing to combine these, if you're willing to say, I'm moving past this Democrats, Republicans, we can't blame them, and thinking about blaming them is silly, then it's weird to include the digs against Republicans, right? If we're already willing to give up this point of it's the Republicans' fault and whatever and yada yada, then we probably shouldn't make the conservative digs, right? Because it's difficult to have both. And in order to get the full benefits of this last statement, we kind of needed to not have any digs against conservatives earlier on. This is going to work best if we didn't make fun of these people, right? It's a lot like if a celebrity wanted to do BLM stuff right now and they made a whole career on like making fun of black people or something, then they're probably going to have a hard time doing that, right? Because if you did these things before, it's going to make the thing you want to do now harder. If you're already down to do this thing and you know you want to do this thing right now, let's make some conscious decisions not to do things that could mess that up for us, right? So that's what this is about. So Milo responds and instantly jumps on the statement you made about not using the book.
The title of this debate has to do with a subject that you seem unwilling or unable to talk about. You can dismiss, if you like, the text of the white fragility theory offhand with what you say is perfectly correctly, by the way, is a terrible book by a terrible person with terrible motives. But that's what we're here to talk about. And if you don't want to talk about her, you can at least talk about the theory in general terms. Now,
I'd imagine he prepared with this angle in mind. So this is predictable. We should have been able to predict the Milo prep for the book. Jangles may have thought that separating himself from the book would throw Milo off his game and that they could argue that way. Now, Milo is not somebody who, without some schmoozing, argues from a position of being behind. If you watch any of his talks from a rhetorical standpoint, or at least the 3 or 4 that I watched, he doesn't argue from a position of weakness. He often tries to reassert himself somewhere where he feels like he can throw shit from the best. Assuming we can knock him off his game by doing this early assumes that the audience and the other side will be on the team of divorcing from the book, which they're not. He actually comes off okay in the beginning because he's reasonably polite, thanks you, acknowledges the issues in speaking with him, etc. So his tone actually is pretty good. He says, you know, I'm thankful that you talked to me. I understand that it's not an easy thing. I understand that like you're going to get a lot of shit from people about it. And I appreciate people like you that are talking to your audience and are saying that you want to have these open conversations. I appreciate them, whatever. You can say that that's all, you know, surface level, whatever, but it happened. So it's worthwhile noting because anybody who doesn't understand Milo, doesn't understand Jangles, that's going to do something for them, right? And it's worth noting that because, again, we want to focus on that 40 and that 20. So we got to keep our eye on them. We have to change the way our brain thinks to account for that position. So if we swap our brains around, this politeness can be taken at face value for somebody that doesn't know Milo. He says that this discussion is outside of the realm of statistics or hard metrics, that it's about emotions. This is getting weird, champ. I feel like this is the remnants of an argument that he couldn't make because we separated from the book so much. And the book is probably all about emotions and stuff, and it doesn't have any statistics in the back of it, which is mentioned later, really. So that's probably what he's going for here. And a lot of this is probably based on the book. This is probably pivotal for his larger or his entire argument. Given that we are facing sober Milo right now, I'd imagine this is part of a larger plan to fight a sourced approach later. Basically, I give Milo some credit. I don't think Milo goes into these without prep. And the way he was looking in the camera, it's very clear he has notes in front of him. So we have to be careful. When people prep, we need to give them a little bit more consideration. We need to keep that in mind. So he's planned an argument. This is probably pivotal to the argument. And we're getting some hints of where he wants to go later, right? This sourced approach, while also making the other side of the argument seem like an unsourced approach, is creating a comparison that will help him later. Milo is a person who only wants to really operate on those optics, and they don't work well for him with left people, but he's starting to change the way he approaches things to make that happen. Distinguishes structural and systemic racism, a common issue when arguing conservatives on this. Yeah, this is another thing where I think prepping arguments for this and distinguishing this probably needs to happen. I don't know if they have the airtime necessary to have that conversation, but being able to work with conservative definitions around these terms might be helpful. I haven't done my research to figure out a plan to do that, but I see this time and time again, a lot of these debates with conservatives or conservative-leaning people about race relations and racism and all these sorts of things tend to revolve around this distinction. So figuring out a way to work within the conservative framework for explaining these things will help us with the 40 and the 20 that are not privy to our side of things. And remember that, like, the same way you're educated on the definitions that leftism offers you and that academia offers you, these people are educated on what their influencers tell them and what their academic sources tell them, right? And it's different. And you can't whine and complain that it's different or say that they're, factually wrong. You kind of have to diffuse that. You have to handle that. You have to deal with that, because simply saying that they're wrong or it's not true or whatever doesn't work. That's the whole point of the arguing, is we have to make our version of that thing more convincing. And I don't think that's accomplished here. Like you, he separates himself from the author. He's happy you didn't like it and goes on to describe insights of hers that he doesn't relate to. Again, I think this is part of an argument that he doesn't really get to make, because it's weird that this guy's on his team. He believes that these shittier beliefs are being projected onto others by white liberals like the author, calls the discomfort with blacks to be a left-wing thing. So he talks about, this person in this book is talking about these, terrible things that she's thinking about black folks. And I just look at it and I say, I don't feel that way about black people. I think that this whole concept of white fragility is actually this thinking that left liberal people have about black people, and it's actually an internal conflict that they're struggling with because their positions are not aligning with what they truly believe in. And we kind of hint at the hypocrisy thing that a lot of right-leaning people like to say about left-leaning people, those kinds of themes. This is why, again, paying attention to the whistling of the other side, same as paying attention to the whistling of your side and how either side interprets it. We need to know that because it helps us navigate this, right? If I know that when he's saying that, he's getting at this theme of hypocrisy that his fans like, that can help me in deciding how I'm going to deal with that. If you're arguing with somebody that's conservative, being aware of this theme of hypocrisy that they put on the left can really be helpful for figuring out how to approach arguments. You have to keep in mind that if I say something that could be misconstrued in a way that's going to help that hypocrisy, then that's going to work against me, right? These people are listening for something different. So I can't allow the things that I say to unwittingly help their argument, right? And there's a lot of unwittingly helping arguments in a lot of the debate reviews that I do. So being more cognizant of that requires being more cognizant of the other side, which I hope we're able to push more on this channel. This idea is not addressed at fixing anything. This is another repeating thing I hear about the white fragility thing, or a lot of these social criticisms, is like, how does this help us? How does it help us to say that, these bad things about, good white folks? There's a lot of that going on. And so, like, coming up with some patterns for addressing that is going to be helpful if you debate these things often. And I don't necessarily see a lot of people with prepped stuff for this angle of attack. How do you walk the line between being charitable and wholesome and helping the other side's argument? So I don't think you have to help the other side's argument. I think that's the one thing that's not like the others in this list that Himalayan has given. Himalayan says being charitable, wholesome, and helping the other side's argument. I don't think we have to help the other side's argument. What we need to do is we need to be aware of where the other side is going with their argument so we can work against that, whether low-key or on the surface of the argument. So planning things that we're saying so we don't help their argument, right? So I don't want to say something that could be misconstrued as being hypocritical. Like, if I can imagine that somebody with bad faith is going to interpret it in a bad way, I need to not say that. I need to say it in a different way. I'm trying to think of another way that I can explain this. So it's like, imagine you're back in school. Remember the one kid in school that if you said something that's like something that a woman said, they would be like, that's what she said. Or if you say something that is like, could be a euphemism for something else, like the wording is poor, they jump on and go, that's what she said. Or if we take it a step further, I don't know how young my audience is. When you're in elementary school and you say duty or something, and that one person that goes, he said duty, that means poop. When you know that somebody is going to respond a certain way to something, you can plan the way that you talk to not give them those opportunities. So the same way that you learn to kind of change the way that you're talking to not let them do that, That's what we need to do in these arguments. We need to change some of the answers that we give to account for the most common ways that they could be misconstrued, right? So that's what I'm talking about. We don't have to help the other side's argument. If we want to be wholesome and charitable, we can be charitable by creating our own interpretation of the argument that we're willing to argue against, which you could interpret as helping the other. Oh, wow, Amanda Joy, thanks for that. Good to see you. Duty. Hey. So I don't think you have to do all those things. I think being charitable and wholesome is just about like taking everything that they're saying and like thinking of how you could be convinced by it and then argue with that and confirm that with the other person. Like what I do is I build a version of their argument that I feel confident in going against. Because I feel like it's almost like if I can give them a good position on the board for like what I think is going to be a fun game, like a game where I can't predict where we're going to go from here. So like I pick things that sound appealing to me. Like I go, okay. So it's almost like I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody that I want to be convinced by their argument. So I listen to what they're saying. I go, okay, yeah. So essentially we think that XYZ about ABC, right? All right. And then we think DEF about AJK. Like, okay. Yeah, so basically XYZ. Yeah, basically XYZ. Okay. So I get that. Give me 2 seconds because that does make sense. Yeah, because if XYZ is ABC, then this. Maybe to give you some background on what I'm thinking about, I'm used to tying ABC to AJK way over here. So for me, hearing ABC and XYZ compared that way is just not something I'm used to. So I have to think about that for a second. And if there are hangups in my thought process about relating these two ideas, like if I'm struggling to relate this idea of white fragility to like not being able to comment on white issues, I might just ask about that. If I'm good faith, I will just ask about that directly in a way that's going to produce my answer that I want. I will ask in a way that from the way I ask the question, I can convey what I'm looking for in an answer. So I will ask a question that betrays exactly what I want to know. That's good faith. Now, if I assume the other person is bad faith, would I make that same decision? No. I wouldn't ask a question that shows my intentions, and I wouldn't ask an open question that I can't guess the answer to. I would want to ask questions that are going to point to an answer I think already exists, or I'm going to ask questions that are putting them in a position that they can't make the answer they want to give. So this requires some prediction about their answer. If you honestly don't know what their answer should be and you assume they're bad faith, careful about asking that question. Because if you're not predicting where it's going to go, you're rolling the dice for no reason. And not only that, you're rolling the dice, you're giving up your turn, and then you're guaranteeing that that other person has free reign in their response to you and that they can pick whatever and that you're not going to see it coming. That's a really weird place to put yourself in when you're dealing with somebody who's bad faith. So when you're good faith, it's fine. When you're bad faith, when the other person is assumed to be bad faith, this isn't good. You want to ask a question that's going to go somewhere you can expect. Because the other thing is, when you ask the question, you don't want to give them the full floor. You want to give yourself some out in that question such that you can interrupt them if they don't answer it correctly. So for instance, asking a question that's repeated, like for the second or third time, and going, okay, I hear what you're saying. You're saying that X, Y, Z, whatever, but I'm asking you about ABC. So I'm saying, how do you define ABC? And then they go on a long spiel about X, Y, Z and how X, Y, Z is awful and whatever. Then don't ask the same question again. Don't. Because they're going to go in the X, Y, Z direction when you're asking about ABC. So we have to think. How can I force them to give me the ABC answer? Or if I think XYZ is awful, how can I frame their XYZ answer in a way that's going to be bad? Like, okay, well, XYZ doesn't work when we talk about it from this perspective. So I'm going to ask a question that's going to force this person to analyze XYZ in this perspective. And if I ask a specific enough question, then I also lay these little seeds for me to interrupt the other person. So if I can ask a very specific question, a very pointed question, maybe reference back to the fact that I didn't get an answer before. Maybe if I want to take it a step further, bringing the mod in on the question. So just going, and I just want to make sure I'm not being crazy. So can you make sure that like I get an answer to this just because I need it for my argument moving forward? If we get hung up on this one question, it's going to take forever. So I'm going to ask you again, ABC. How do we define ABC or whatever? So that's what I'm talking about, is you want to format your question in a way that gives you an opportunity to interrupt them, that is going to frame it in a way where they're going to have to give you an answer that plays into your argument, and that automatically gives you the next step after the discussion. So once they give you the answer, they're not able to keep giving their points. You're immediately given an opportunity to respond. So you've guaranteed when your next talking time is. You've guaranteed after they give me this response, which has to be pointed or I interrupt it, then I get to talk, right? And if we want to talk immediately after, we can go back to the question. We can go, okay, how do I phrase this question in a way that I'm guaranteed to answer? Well, I could also add a second sentence at the end of the question to say, because if you think A, then I have to go this way. But if you think B, then we can go this way. If you do that, you're giving where you're going to go next. You're saying, this is a binary choice, so I've limited your choices. You're going to pick one or the other, or else I'm going to interrupt you. The mod is going to be on my team, and I'm prepared for A or B. I'm prepared for either of those answers. So I'm ready. That's a good question. I've asked a question that's empowered me with the mod, that gives me an opportunity to interrupt, limits their choices as far as questions, and I'm prepared for either of those answers. That's what I mean by a powerful question. That's what I mean by asking something with intent. The same way that Milo, when he asks about this white fragility thing and tying it to all these psychological concepts, he frames it in a way where if you don't give me the answer to this question immediately and directly, I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm going to say you're not answering the question. And my question is so ridiculous that if you try to answer this and don't give an answer, it seems like you're aware that it's ridiculous. And some people could come away thinking your point is ridiculous because you're not able to answer this question. Yes, if these apply to everything, then why can't they apply to this thing? And if you don't give a good answer to that silly question, the people who believe in the silly thing or who are under the impression your argument is silly will continue to believe that because you did nothing to dissuade them of it. So this is what I mean. That's what I mean by asking questions that are going to do something for you. You want to be intentional about it. Like if we're playing chess and you enter into a certain pattern on the board, there are attacks and defenses that I can predict that you're probably going to do. And so that's what I mean. Play out a few steps of this in your head. Know the general tendency of where people want to take this. Know what are the win conditions for this person. What are the lose conditions? How can I push them away from win conditions and push them into lose conditions? And how can I do that without them seeing it coming? So there's a lot of levels to this. And I'm just saying that being aware, having a model in your head of the other person is good. If we're being super good faith, I think the devil's advocate thing that you were talking about before might have been constructing an argument in your own head that is the good thing and then confirming it with the other person so you have something good to argue against. That's one thing that you could do. But I don't know if you're being the devil's advocate because you're not arguing necessarily why they're arguing. You're arguing why you would argue the thing. So I'm just creating a lesser level of me that I'm confident that I could roll over. So if I think you're making a point and you're not making it very good or it doesn't make sense or whatever, and I cook up my brain version, I know how to beat my brain version. Like usually there's a reason why I'm presenting that as the way that I want to talk about the argument. Most people, that is the reason why they're presenting that. So it's not really a good faith thing. A lot of the time that can be perceived as a bad faith thing. So that's why I'm like, I don't know. A lot of the times when you disagree with somebody that vehemently, you are not able to continue in the conversation with them. You are not able to come up with the next line of topic. You are not able to come up with adequate questions, and you're not able to conceive of the way that they're viewing the world. So to remedy that level one problem that is going to result in uninteresting and misguided conversation, you have to have some version of the other person that's positive in your mind to kind of start moving forward on that. Because unless your whole purpose there is to diffuse every bad idea that they have, you're going to want a back and forth conversation. And to do that, you probably want the best version of whatever they have, or the most understandable, one that you can interface with. If you can't interface with what they're giving you, try to create something that you can, something you're comfortable interacting with, right? And typically, the way that I'm phrasing that new thing that I'm coming up with isn't so much a good faith devil's advocate thing. It's like I'm constructing an argument where I go, oh, okay, theoretically, if I knew about all of these concepts except for these two, I could be deceived into believing this point. So I'm finding the thing that's missing, or the bit of my knowledge base or opinions that if I took it out, this thing could exist. So like, if I didn't know anything about gun rights, maybe I would think this. Or like, if I didn't know these psychological concepts, I would think this. That's all I'm doing the entire time I'm watching these panels too, is I'm constantly carrying 2 or 3 characters with me through the entire watching of it and seeing how those different characters would respond. So if we have no information about Milo Yiannopoulos prior to the conversation, how do we come out? How does that person end up thinking about them? If the only pieces I could use to judge his character are off of this one conversation, what does that look like? Same thing for Jangles. If I was somebody who was on the fence and I'm waiting for faults on either side to start, not giving them reputation and not listening to them, who loses out first? That's another important one, right? There are fence sitters who will make their first impressions about people based on what happens in the first 30 minutes. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do. And if you want to call those devil's advocates, the little, dolls that we're making to experience the conversation and interpret it, that's cool. I don't really think about them that way, though. That is what is going to allow you to make an interesting conversation for other people and yourself, too, is like if I have a doll that's got a competent argument that I think I can interface with using my own arguments, then that's better for us, right? That's going to be a more productive conversation. It's going to be more interesting. It's going to give me something where I'm able to show the teeth of my argument a bit better, too. It's not just all benefiting the other person. It's giving me something that I'm confident I could argue against. And if they want to hop in that suit of armor and play around with that argument, they can go ahead and have fun with it. I already know how I'm going to beat it. Because again, the argument I gave them is me minus something, or me, in the best case, with a change in morals or like principles. So I'm just trying to figure out what version of Noah could exist that believes in this crazy fucking thing that this other person believes. And then I just argue against that thing. So I go, okay, can you believe this, and then this, and then this, and then this? Okay. So Noah version number 2, I can argue with that. That's fine. But sometimes the way that people naturally create their arguments and the way that they come off are not very good. Anywho, we've kind of not gotten past the first the first point. So let's just run through this real quick because we got less than half an hour before he hops on. Let's see. Whoa. Jesus. Good God. This idea is, quote, not addressed to fix anything. Yeah, that was interesting. White fragility is not the way we help Black America. That's kind of a powerful sentence. I don't know if that really means anything, but whatever. As he's wrapping up and even talking about the transition for you, still pretty chill, by the way, you are hurrying him along, making fun of the time he's taking, and actually generally frustrated. I don't think this was at all deserved, and it looks really bad. Oh, okay, so here's where we start with this. He pretends, and I say pretend because if we look at the times that they take, it's actually comparable.
Hey, what's up, guys? Booksmarts, the editor here. I went back and checked the times. Jangles took 8 minutes and 49 seconds for his intro, and Milo took 9 minutes and 9 seconds for his intro. So there you can see those.
He pretends like Milo is taking a lot longer than he is to make a lot of his points, which is funny because his diatribe at the beginning felt really, really long as a viewer. So that's interesting to hurry him along like that. He's going like...
Not really what we're here to talk about. Once again, I'm afraid. We're here to talk about legacy of slavery and it's and then we could maybe have a chat because I don't see there's much point me with.
He's doing stuff like that while Milo is talking, and this is something we're starting off on a bad foot. We've given some digs against conservatives. We're memeing about how long it's taking Milo to do his opening statement, the one thing that's protected in the whole debate. There hasn't even been a back and forth yet. Like, be careful. this is indicating this kind of like snarky attitude that continues through this whole thing, and I don't know if that works for the 40% on the other side. You begin by condescendingly pointing out that you said the definition and your defense in your opening.
For Milo, I defined white fragility and defended its existence in my opening statement. Now, you should be able to appreciate this, but the reason that you've heard about white fragility, the book,
the definition was clouded in an explanation of these different kinds of terms. So no, you didn't really. In your defense of it, it didn't really come off as a defense, because it really came off as you wanting to divorce the word from the text very, very quickly. It didn't really seem like you were in support of the thing, especially since for most people, they will associate the term with the book. And so if you are shitting on the book for the whole first part of your talk, it almost appears that you would not then agree with the idea that came from the book. Granted, the reality of this situation is that the book is dumb, but it is pointing to things that exist. And that's what makes that difficult, but we don't make that super duper clear. So to be clear, I was under the impression you were defying your label in your separation from the term. Yeah, so as a first-time viewer, I thought it was weird that he was on the yes side of things, but was defying his label by separating from the term. I thought that was a ballsy move. I thought that he's doing something different and trying to say, you know, I'm going to defend this term, but unlike other people, I'm not going to defend the book. The book is dumb. I'm going to defy like this label put on me. I'm not going to defend this book. I'm going to defend the ideas that make up this term. But he didn't word it that well in as few words up here, so it didn't really come off that way. Aside from that, you set up a three-part argument: justify power structures, post hoc rationalizations, and people don't like that it harms their self-image. So this is the three-part argument that I think he finally gets a chance to flesh out in a understandable way. So he says, I have a three-part argument, basically. Number one, the justification for power structures. People will constantly try to justify power structures, and they tend to be post hoc rationalizations, meaning we go back in time and we kind of just reason things based on how they are now rather than like any reasonable, logical, following of events that led to them, that we're just kind of going back and agreeing with things in retrospect, and that they don't like info that harms their self-image. So if you combine those two terms with one that describes people not wanting their self-image harmed, then we start to have the pieces we need to describe white fragility. But you have not made clear that connection between this and the book definition of white fragility. If you wanted to divorce yourself, pointing out how your definition differs from the one in the book would be necessary, but you can't, because you secretly want to defend the term the book is using. You just don't want to defend the book. So it's a tricky place to be in. It's a tricky place because the concept in the book is still really represented by the concepts that you're giving out, right? But you have essentially changed the definition here. And that definition change is going to be, reason for argument. So unless you win that argument, you cannot continue with this change in the definition. That is going to be the first point of contention. These are simple psychological concepts that essentially make up white fragility. All right. Milo responds by saying you should be on his side, and he doesn't know why you came here to debate it. This is something he says in other conversations, so I think this is just like a stylistic copy pasta, again, for an argument that they weren't able to have, because he clearly prepped for something that they didn't talk about, so I think he's reusing a lot of his points that he's already typed up. I note that I would have let him go here after condescending the first time and interrupting his possible response earlier. The mod has to jump in, so this is a bit of a foul. So this is a bait. He's baiting him. And the moment he jumps in, Milo snaps at him. The mod has to jump in, and we get our first really big foul here for Jangles.
Hold on, no, because
I don't understand why you agree to speak in the affirmative. For a debate, is white fragility real? When you don't want me to tell you a third time, and all that.
Hold on. Do you want me to tell you a third time?
You can attempt.
To be fair, I do want to give Milo a chance.
But you can attempt to be patronizing if you like.
And this is going to keep happening. If you guys have the yellow flags in the chat, this is our very first foul. Is what happens is he interrupts Milo. And I didn't note this, but the important reason why Milo doesn't allow interruptions is because Jangles didn't allow interruptions in his explanation. He said, "You're not interrupting me."
Tell them, hold on. If you tell them to say that, hold on, I'm not done. Whoa, come on. I'm not done making my point because I'm pretty sure that you didn't listen or understand the point.
Whatever. And from that moment, Milo took that and is going to use that for everything else. And we can presume that after the very first time he uses it.
Like a school teacher rearranging her charge with crayons.
I could be a terrible... No, I had intent there.
Is it okay to interrupt now? Your rules, not mine.
Sorry, buddy.
After the very first time, we have to have the moderator come in here and break this up.
To be fair, I do want to give Milo a chance. But...
We need to be more careful. That should be our signal to be more careful. He says that you gave a complex answer, but haven't defended what you've come here to defend, which is kind of fair. You definitely did give a complex answer, and I don't think you're necessarily defending what you've come here to defend. But this is, again, his frustration that he doesn't get to have the conversation he wanted to have. Whether that's granted or not is probably based on your opinion about Milo, but to be fair, I would assume that they're here to talk about the book's definition. He's dropped the fun/nice dude thing at this point, and now he's strongmanning you because your opening was complex and didn't provide a direct response to the debate topic. I'd say your response afterwards did, but let's see how you respond to this. So I don't think that his first argument, as well written as it was, really served the purpose of showing his opinion on anything or making it clear. He does that way better here by pointing out that there's this three-part thing and just pointing out the three parts. I don't think you need the complicated explanation where we give 2 or 3 sentences to each aspect of this argument because it doesn't come off as easily in the spoken word. It doesn't come off as clearly that there are 3 parts to your argument and that they make up this new definition. It only made sense once you explained it in those explicit terms. So that's something to keep note of. You give a complex answer, whatever. Let's see how you respond. You ask, do you know what an analogy is? And continue on the condescension.
The thing you're here to defend.
Do you know what an analogy is? So the concept
You want to try that again, have a real conversation? Do you know what an analogy is? I mean, come on.
So our snarkiness is coming in at points that are not helping us. And that's the other thing, is like snarkiness in service of your argument is one thing. Who do we know that uses snarkiness to support their arguments? You guys know. There's a lot of people, frankly, that are able to use snarkiness to their benefit, because when you use it to be witty or intelligent, it can come off well to the viewers who are on your team, or even sometimes the people on the other side, if you want to poke fun at them in a good way. This does not look good. And this is coming very early in this conversation. We've had one opening remark, another opening remark, and then we've had one back and forth. That's it. And we're already on, do you know what an analogy is? You didn't make your shit clear in your opening remark. And when he's saying complex answer, could very easily be referring to your opening statement, which was not clear at all. To be fair to you, it was not clear. And if you weren't listening like really good faith to catch your 3-part description, if you're still hung up on the idea that this opening didn't go well and somebody has like started applying that to their interpretation of your arguments, even this here, I had to rewatch back to get the 3 parts, because you skip over the summarized version of your argument so quickly that we can't remember what it is. You do the complicated version a lot. Yeah, that's good. That gives nuance, whatever. If we don't then combine that with the simplified version, with our like conclusion sentence for each of those points, it's not as clear to the audience. They can't really keep up that well. Even me, who's listening for this very purpose, had a hard time keeping up with that. I had to go back and I had to rewind and I had to look back. The people that are watching live are not going to have that benefit. So we have to worry about that. One thing you'll notice in a lot of my rhetorical talks with these people is I try very hard to repeat myself on the basic sentences that are communicating what I want to communicate. So I'll give a whole big spiel, an answer that's maybe 3 to 6 sentences long, and then I'll cap it with a 1 to 2 sentence basic explanation of the takeaway. So if I go, yeah, like when you did this here, I thought it was brilliant. And when you did this here, you obviously could have done more if you chose to do this. So I think in general, just choosing to do this is going to be better. You know, because if you're in a situation where so-and-so says this, and then you've got to say this, and then they say this back, again, blah, blah, blah. Doing this is going to be your best bet. I want to repeat that doing this is your best bet. The simple main thing that I want the takeaway to be, and I want to put that in between the larger explanations. The larger explanations are either to bolster the belief that this person has and what I'm talking about, or to try and convince them, to show them, look, hey, this principle applies here, it applies here, it applies here. That's why I think this principle. Like, blah, blah, blah situation where it works, that's why I believe in the principle. Another blah, blah, blah situation where it would work, and he used the principle. So, in my opinion, I like using the principle. Situation like this, I use the principle like this. A lot of repeating the principle part or the situation part, the summarized part, because that's what will stick with people. And if you just give them a ton of stuff and you don't give them enough of the simplified thing, that's not going to stick. It's rough. He asked if you want to try again and have a real conversation. So here is the other problem, is if you start being snarky, the other person can call that bluff. The other person can make you uncomfortable for being snarky. Milo is probably very used to this, being the one who's normally snarky. Maybe this time around he's trying to play the other side of the fence, because the other side of the fence is, I can threaten to take this conversation away from you. I can point out the fact that you're being childish. I can say this isn't a real conversation. I could say that this isn't good faith. I can point out a lot of bad things the moment you're bad faith. And if anybody's on my team, they don't really care about the logic of that. They're just going to grab onto it. So giving them the opportunity and the footholds to call that out, not good. Because again, what did we gain by saying, do you know what an analogy is? Maybe we got some giggles from the people on our team. What does this do for us on the other side, or for the fence sitters, though? That's where we have to worry. How does this combine with how we're already interpreted and how this guy is like explaining us to the audience? This is not working in our favor. He asked if you want to try again and have real conversations. I say there's a lot of fuckery here he pulls, around 24 minutes. All of it works well for him. He's pulling the brakes and doing so with what you've already said. And to the people listening with favorability for him, they'll see the hypocrisy he's highlighting. So not good, again, for that 40% we're trying to get. He says you've ignored the debate topic, which has thrown off his prep, predictably. That you've been rude to the host, which arguable, but I guess technically. And that all this has happened in spite of him trying to be kind, which, again, for his whole part here, he was pretty okay. He got a little spicy at the end, and he was spicy here. But for the most part, at this point in the debate, he has been reasonably kind, at least in his opening statement. He points out breaking your own rule of not interrupting. You then asked, did I? And gave him a fresh example, which seemed like a stupid decision. So to give you some background, at this point in the conversation, the tension is a little bit high. The mod guy knows that he's going to have to step in for this conversation at a few different points. He knows that Milo is going to harp on this interruption thing. Milo has pointed out the fact that Jangles continues to use the interruption thing. And so given all this nonsense about interrupting, is the smart thing to do to jump in on that and correct the way that he's framing it?
And now you're breaking your own rules by interrupting me when you just scolded me for doing the same. It makes me wonder whether you're in faith. You just did it again.
What do we gain from that? And what do we lose from that? And if we ask that question at several points in here where the snark comes into play, we realize we're losing a lot, and we're really not positioned to gain much out of these snarky remarks. They kind of only hurt us. There are ways that snarky remarks can help us, but they weren't positioned that way. So a lot of the conversation, we make these snarky remarks that can lose us that 40% or lose us that 20%, but they provide no benefit outside of bolstering our 40%, which, to my understanding, isn't the purpose of this discussion, right? You're not trying to keep your 40% from being lost to Milo or making him look bad. That would be a weird point here. You interrupt way too... No, I didn't. Real five-head move. Yeah, it's like that. It's like your own rule of interrupting and then asking it's like, yeah, this is kind of weird. But this is the same thing of watching, like, whatchamacallit? Watching Muffin Weasel and Muffin Weasel's conversation. It was like, no, bro, you're walking into things that, like, are snark that hurts your point. Like a snark where you make a joke about the murder of a bunch of people, when you're criticizing somebody for making memes in support of regimes that killed a lot of people, it's weird. It's like, of all the jokes to make, would I make jokes about that? No. Would I make jokes about the Jews and Nazis? No, not in that conversation, and probably not in any. So there's some basic stuff where it's like, I don't know why we did that. It's probably out of frustration, which we got to keep a cap on. But aside from that, I don't know what the advice is there. Yeah, I don't know. This time you make the connection to unknowingly helping slave trade way more clearly. And I actually went back and edited what I wrote here for his opening based on the explanation that he gave over here. Because again, while it was worded very nicely, while it came off and sounded really good, I couldn't really understand a lot of the stuff in the opening. It was very, very dense. And so when he explained the link to the slave trade thing again, I kind of understood what he was saying before, which is that people unknowingly help slave trade. But when you point that out to them, they are taken aback. They're like, I'm not supporting slave trade by buying iPhones, and that's dumb as fuck and whatever. And that's an example of this fragility about what they're doing, right? That they refuse to accept that. They're not even going to hear logic about that. They're just, they hear it and they automatically don't want that to be the truth, right? And so that was his point there. A good point, a good logical point, a good analogy could have been made way more clear. So shitting on him for not knowing what an analogy is silly. I should be shitting on you for not using the analogy properly or explaining it very well. That an analogy is only as good as the clarity of the connection between the two items that we're comparing, right? So if you don't make it clear the connection between the two items, the analogy falls apart, regardless of how objectively comparable the two things are. If you don't make that clear, then it doesn't really do you any good. Perhaps it was at the beginning sounding like it was meant to be read, so it came off more difficult to understand. This is a note I gave myself that I'm going to say is probably true, which is that when your opening statement was written out and you're reading it in private with all the text in front of you, it probably reads a lot better. But there are little things that help text compared to when it's spoken that just if you're not factoring them in, something that's written really well will not read very well to other people. There are benefits of having the text on the page and being able to skim it and seeing what's coming next and the way that things are ordered in their paragraphs. And like, there's other reasons why it could work good on the page, but not spoken. And it's one of those things that's tough to wrap your brain around, because it's tough to put yourself in the perspective of somebody who is brand new and alien to your speech that you're writing, right? It's very difficult to put yourself in the headspace of somebody who has not seen this and does not know what it looks like in text form and is going to hear it for the first time in spoken speech as quickly as you want to say it. Yeah, I don't know how we can improve this, but it's worth noting that if you write something out, it's not necessarily going to sound the same way when you explain it, and people are not going to interpret it the same way. So treating these two things as different is going to be helpful for your writing and your arguing. Then he goes into some long rant about creating the idea of black fragility from your argument, but it doesn't really make sense. Maybe it was left over from the book angle. A lot of stuff like that. A lot of remnants from the book approach to this debate from Milo that didn't end up happening. He just kind of reuses it. You jump in to summarize and say, dude, you're taking a long time to say that the answer to the problem is that black people should just act better.
Dude, you're taking a long time to say that you think the answer to the problem is that black people should just act better. That's a way that you could have taken that entire thing and like condensed it into the actual point that you're making.
So now we're interrupting and answering for each other. Is that right? Am I allowed to do that to you too?
Again, this, maybe you gain something from it. Maybe if the people that are sitting on the fence have been moved by your argument enough and they're smelling the horse shit in the other person's argument enough, they might respond well to this. But again, without winning that 20% in the middle, without being the man for the 40% that are against you this whole conversation, this doesn't really land with the 40 or the 20. And it comes off as really mean and bad faith, because you're kind of just putting words in his mouth and interrupting him and misunderstanding him just as much as he's misunderstanding you. He responds, now we're interrupting and answering for each other. So again, your snark, he's going to keep commenting on it. He's positioning himself as opposite of the snark. That may work well or bad for him, but it's something he'll continue to do. So how are we playing around that? We're just going to keep walking into it and giving it to him? I don't know. It's weird. Because you also know that you're not going to be able to speak over him and get a bunch of talking time because the mod guy will shut you up. So what was the plan? I don't know. I don't think that there was a plan more than a few steps ahead. So again, this will be a talk with Jangles ScienceLad about their conversation with Milo Yiannopoulos. I've taken notes chronologically for the entire thing, minus some of the Q&A section towards the end, which I stayed for a couple of, but the debate was over, so I didn't continue through that. But yeah, we have questions for or quotes for the entire thing, and any of the boxes I have to check. Anywho, let's go ahead and get him in here.
What is up, my brothers? Welcome to the van. Today we are hanging out. Today we are finishing up the edit. I just wanted to come here and so I am finishing up the edit, but it is taking me too long. I have spent hours and hours making sure that it is perfect for you. I need a break. So what I figure is I will post what I have now, which is pre-debate analysis purely, and next week we will upload the full thing with notes. So, bye.